program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
They're all. Sorry. I have now a feeling that we were muted during the Pledge of Allegiance, but at least you got to see us rise and do it here. We start with our public forum, and we have 3 people signed up tonight. Each commenter has up to 4 minutes to address the board. If you could please state your name and address for the record. Our first speaker tonight is Kristin Nelson.
Great. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you. Bartlett Fort in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Both my spouse and I have personally benefited from the education we received in public schools. We are concerned, however, about the rapid changes occurring in instruction and curriculum in our community. I'm concerned about how these changes will impact the quality of education for my children. Currently, I cannot support the equitable multi-level systems support model and the proposal to eliminate honors, enrichment, and basic course offerings that is being discussed and potentially voted on today due to a lack of supporting evidence. I reference the original document entitled Wisconsin's Framework for Equitable Multi-Level Systems Support, drafted by then Superintendent Tony Evers, and although the model emphasizes the strategic use of data, nowhere in the document was any data presented to support this model. No statistical evidence that the model increases student achievement for all students or how it minimizes the achievement gap between high and low achievers. What I would find of particular interest is whether this model closes the gap by increasing the performance of lower achievers or if it lowers the achievement of high achieving students. Nowhere have I been able to access this statistical analysis. Please provide facts and figures on how this model supports all students, including those who traditionally take honors and enrichment courses. If this data does not show a benefit to these students as well, then further discussion and input from the public is needed. Additionally, many European countries do not use this type of model of Emlss, and in fact use a more structured system of separating students based on ability and interest. It has also been shown that student achievement in European countries using their system of schooling is higher than in the US when compared in international rankings. Implementation of a method that reduces student options based on ability and interest therefore demands further scrutiny. This feels like the wrong direction for our schools, and I feel that high achievers may lose interest in opportunities in school as they are not appropriately challenged. Students should be empowered with choices, as personal choices contribute to success inside and outside of school. I would like to see data, facts, figures, and statistics that support this model. Without it, it is merely a conglomeration of uplifting buzzwords and feel-good theories, but lacks in supporting evidence. It should not be hard to convince me of the benefit of Emlss with data and statistics if a benefit is indeed to be had. The data will determine whether I can and you should support this model in our schools. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Our second speaker tonight is Brian Amundsen.
Hi, my name is Brian Amundsen. Are you able to hear me okay?
We are.
So I am an electrical engineer by profession. I grew up not attending a school that did not have the benefit of an AP program. Our children attended school in Eau Claire, in Memorial, had the benefit of the AP program, and we got to see the incredible benefit that that provided. So I'd like to make 2 points. First, it simply cannot be as effective to teach advanced subjects in a classroom with multiple curricula being taught. To convey instruction on pre-calculus simultaneously with instruction on algebra can simply not be effective as in a separate classroom. You have different topics on the different whiteboards and the different dialogue in the classroom. It simply cannot be as effective. And really, effective education is what it's all about. We want, our children did benefit by going to universities where they were able to get probably a semester less in cost in tuition because they had the benefit of advanced placement classes. That's a tremendous benefit. It also helps our colleges and our universities to get the 4-year degrees conferred as they hope. The second point I'd like to make is that the students are already acutely aware of the differences in ability. The stratification into clusters of ability, that point is reinforced on a daily basis. And so that stratification is understood. Therefore, it simply it's simply best to have that AP class taught in the AP classroom so that the education is most effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker tonight is Karen Piker.
Hi, you all received an email from me regarding the policy 343.1 and the reasons I believe you should postpone the adoption of that policy. I'm in favor of greater input from the community and a better planned rollout. The method by which this proposal took place in the policy committee under the topic of equity deprived community members from speaking to the proposal during the development stage. By the time the proposal was read at the board meeting 2 weeks ago, there was an air of celebration, kind of, about the righteousness of this effort and an assumption that all district staff would be ready to implement this massive change by next fall. I must tell you that every teacher I spoke to said that a change of this magnitude would take significantly more time for professional development than you are assuming, and they definitely will not be ready to implement this policy with fidelity in the timetable you are discussing. I strongly suggest that you roll this out at the elementary level first, or even at specific elementary schools, focusing a significant amount of professional development on learning to better identify, encourage, and challenge the many gifted students of color that are not presently being served in the gifted and talented programming. Because the middle and high school teachers will have the biggest challenge with adopting the cluster grouping, why not give them more time to prepare? And why permanently eliminate the enriched courses right away rather than allowing the time to train the teaching staff properly? Every student in this district deserves the kind of education that meets their needs and maximizes their prospects in life. That includes all students currently in middle and high school that are looking forward to taking some enriched classes to prepare them for the challenge of AP. This proposal may work very well in the long run, but current middle and high school students should not have to sacrifice the rigor and challenge they need for the next several years while the staff comes up to speed on this new method of classroom instruction. I have to say, and you already know this, your staff is incredibly overwhelmed and discouraged already. Families are also overwhelmed and discouraged, and because of COVID, they're also in the dark as to the change that might be coming with this policy. I believe your good intentions have clouded your judgment as to how hard this will be to implement, and the amount of time and the amount of buy-in also that will be necessary from your stakeholders. I ask you to slow down, roll this out a little at a time, and remember the kids who are already in high school and are counting on you to offer them the enrichment they need right now and not just a few years in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our next agenda item, which is Superintendent Johnson. Superintendent Johnson, if you can hear us, we're ready for your superintendent's report. So as I'm sure everyone has gathered, we have a little technical issue in the executive room right now with the sound. We're gonna wait here for a moment and let them get it straightened out.
Sound check testing.
Yes, we can hear you, James.
Thank you, James. Good evening, Chair Nordine, board members, executive team members, and public. Thanks for your patience. It's been extremely busy since last board meeting, and I'd like to provide an update on a few important items. The Instructional Model Family Survey closed on Tuesday, November 3rd. We had 5,900 responses, including all levels and cohorts. Families responded with a 78% satisfaction rate with the face-to-face component of our blended model, with the greatest success being class size. There was only a 38% satisfaction rate for the virtual component of the blended model, with families seeking more peer-to-peer interaction in the virtual component. We will post a final report of the survey feedback on the website quickly, as we wish to have our teaching and learning staff review all results before this is presented publicly, and thank everyone who participated. This information will be especially valuable as we transition to 100% virtual after Thanksgiving. We'll utilize this feedback to improve the satisfaction and ensure success for all students. Many thanks to Michelle Radke, our Director of Assessment, for developing and disaggregating all the data. Anagen Testing started on Saturday at Memorial. This collaboration between our district and UW-Eau Claire allowed approximately 520 community members to be tested for free between Saturday and Sunday. Testing will continue at Memorial on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays from noon to 8 p.m. and is available to anyone in the community by appointment. This is a valuable tool to help identify positivity among asymptomatic persons. We encourage all those interested to register and be tested. Special thanks to Chancellor Schmidt and Vice Chancellor Warren Anderson for their invitation to participate and contribute to our community's health, as well as Kim Kohler and the admin team at Memorial High School for their organizational leadership and attention to logistics. Friday, we made a very difficult decision to transition to the 100% virtual instructional model effective November 30th through December 8th. Our staff and students have done an excellent job of masking, washing hands, and maintaining social distancing in the buildings, which has prevented viral spread in our schools. However, we've reached a level of staff absence that requires us to move to this virtual model until we can safely staff again. It has been an extremely collaborative experience over the past few weeks, including every available and willing substitute, as well as the staff from district office to keep buildings open, not to mention the staff internally who are covering for their colleagues. We learned from Monday's data that 95 staff quarantined last week, almost triple the amount from the previous week. This is before any of the effects of the Anagen testing at Memorial. On Friday, 20 staff members from the district office were sent to cover at schools, as well as today. Unfortunately, the situation is unsustainable for our district. We must be planful and proactive, as many quarantine staff are well enough to teach and support our students. This 100% virtual model will allow us to continue educating students with as little disruption as possible. The learning will not stop in the Eau Claire Area School District. Administrators had worked over the weekend, culminating with a Sunday evening meeting with our system leaders for final developments on the communication plan to teachers and to families. For example, from a family perspective, families will get their child's schedule. Expectations will be shared for virtual programming in the next 2 days. Staff will continue with professional development and to place content in the virtual mode as well. Our Wednesday mornings have been and continue to be critical for this work and will do so in the future. We've heard from concerned parents and community members questions about allowing co-curricular activities to continue. As the instructional model transition is due to a staffing shortage and not due to a spread among students, we believe we can mitigate risk and safely continue these activities at this time for our students. However, we will continue to monitor and analyze the situations closely and work with Eau Claire City County Health and medical experts in the area to ensure safety for our students, their coaches, their advisors, and make adjustments as needed. Finally, this week is American Education Week. The National Education Association organizes this week to honor all who serve in public schools, from custodians to teachers, from aides to administrators, from cafeteria workers to bus drivers and countless others. We could not run a successful district without you. Over 1,400 staff members and partnerships with student transit, edu staff, and many others, especially in such a critical time. Last Wednesday was Veterans Day. At our system leaders meeting, we did discuss about Veterans Day and talked about honoring veterans who have served us and talked a little bit about heroes. And I shared with our system leaders that, please share with your staff about the heroes we have in this district. And I'd like to say that as well tonight to our 1,440 employees in this district. They're my heroes with what we're going through right now and what they've accomplished over this past spring and summer. I'd just like to say thank you for being our partners in education and what you do for students and families and your colleagues every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. For my board president's report, I'd like to piggyback on what you said about our district going to 100% virtual, and I just want to add my thanks on behalf of the board to our teachers and building staff for maintaining that safe learning environment. Really working within those protocols we developed, it has allowed us to provide face-to-face education for a longer period of time than we might have and provide stability to our students. And it's also allowed us to give advance notice to our families and to our staff in order to let them prepare for this switch to 100% virtual. I want to thank the principals and other building administrators that are working on novel solutions that are helping schedules, are helping with coverage, are working in myriad ways to make sure that our buildings continue to run. And of course, to our administrative team for your constant focus on our buildings, our partnership with the City County Health Department in examining all of our district data to make sure that we are ready for our transition and that we've done it at a time where we can manage and get there appropriately. I also want to thank those of you that have been going to cover substitutes. I know in my career as a high school teacher, I covered exactly one period in the middle school, and I told our staff secretary after that, please don't call me again for that. So I know how hard that can be, and you are all much better teachers than I was in that situation. So I want to say thank you for that as well. Really, I just want to say that the willingness and professionalism that our staff up and down the district has shown over these months is a testament to the strength of the people that make up the ECASD. the attention to detail, the caring, and communication are all deeply appreciated by the board and the community. As an informational note, you may have seen ECASD will be presenting an interested candidate informational session for those who are interested in running for the school board in our annual spring election. The session will take place at the board office this Thursday, November 19th at 6:30 p.m. Social distancing, of course, will be maintained and masks are required for attendees. The presentation is also going to be available on our website and through Valley Media Works. So we'll be discussing the role of the board, its governance structure, and provide instructions on how to run for office. So anyone who is interested in potentially running this spring, you're welcome to attend or view through our streaming options. Thank you. We'll now move on to our student representative report. We'll start tonight with our representative from North High School, Zoe Wolf.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Before everyone heard the news of the second closure, there was an atmospheric shift occurring at North. Students and staff were delighted that things were headed towards some normalcy. Extracurriculars were starting to plan events for students to come together in a safe manner. The temporary closure is justifiable due to the staffing shortage. However, it seems that teachers are much more prepared for online learning. It is very reassuring that teachers are already making schedules and planning for weeks, if not months in advance. Some teachers are even asking for student input on how they want the class to be structured. It seems as though there will be a much smoother transition to online learning now that teachers have some experience. Fortunately, extracurriculars are still allowed to be held. Many sports are still planning practices, and the Student Council at North is planning a few charity events for the Christmas season to give back to the community. Although the future is uncertain, adaptation is the main key for navigating through these tough times. Thank you all for staying strong.
Thank you. We'll now go to our representative from Memorial High School, Emery Toole.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I hope you're all doing well. I'm going to keep it super short and sweet tonight. I want to thank the district for making the difficult decision to close. I truly believe it is for the best right now for our students, family, and staffs. And then I just want to ask the district to be as flexible as possible with staff and students who need to make immediate transitions to an online model. Governor Evers' order has been out now for nearly a week, and I ask that the district do everything it can to honor the needs of staff and students who need to stay home right now for the safety of themselves or their families.
Thank you. We'll now move to our school board committee reports. We'll start with budget developments. Commissioner Harder.
Thank you. The Budget Development Committee did not meet since our last board meeting here, but we will be meeting again soon.
Thank you. Demographic trends and facilities planning. Kim Kohler.
We have not met, but we're anxiously awaiting a vote tonight on our previous recommendation.
Sure. LEAP. Jim Schmidt.
We met last week to the final touches on the Arctic Zone video, which will be going out to families and future families of the program very soon. And we began planning for an innovation, a general innovation video for the district. And that process is now beginning, along with potentially looking at Acres for Joy as a partnership for LEAP.
Great, thank you. Policy and governance continued its work on our proposed equity statement for the board. We're currently revising and making sure that the draft has input from many different groups in the community as we work towards a draft to bring forward. We hope to have that draft completed and ready for the full board soon. At our next meeting on Thursday, we will continue that work on the equity statement as well as working on our hiring process and some coherent governance work. We're hopeful that we will complete our draft of the board superintendent relations policies in coherent governance soon, and we'll then take up draft language on governance culture, including feedback from tonight's work session from our colleagues. Thank you. Next up is the legislative update. Dr. Johnson.
Governor Evers announced virtual budget listening sessions. Education will be the focus on December 16th at 6 p.m. Available virtually with the link on the governor's site. On November 10th, Governor Evers issued a new executive order Evers' latest order contains no legally binding edicts, only recommendations. It calls on Wisconsinites to stay home as much as possible and only make trips when necessary. The Department of Health Services has provided a PowerPoint on contact tracing. An important clarification is that this is not intended to be a comprehensive training so much as it is a resource, and that any school and its employees should be working with their local health department prior to beginning any contact tracing effort. On November 9th, Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction submitted its 2021-2023 biennial budget request to fund kindergarten through 12th grade public education and libraries in Wisconsin, and it's one of its largest requests submitted in a while. Voters on Tuesday, November 3rd, continued the strong overall support for local school referendums in recent elections. According to unofficial results filed with the DPI, voters have approved 43 of the 51 school referendums. That's 84% that were on the ballot. 15 of 19 requests to exceed state-imposed revenue limits on non-recurring, temporary, or time-limited basis were approved. That's a 79% passage rate. 9 of 10 requests to exceed state-imposed revenue limits on a recurring, permanent basis were approved, 90%. And then 17 of 20 borrowing referendums were approved, so at 85%. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. The board considers the consent agenda with one vote and without discussion. If any board member wants to discuss an item, it can be pulled from the consent agenda and voted on separately. Tonight's consent agenda includes the minutes of November 2nd, 2020, financial report, October 2020, gifts in the amount of $5,487 for the period of October 1st, 2020 through October 31st, 2020. Payment of all bills in the amount of $5,635,009.70 and net payroll in the amount of $5,599,997.91 for the period of October 1st, 2020 through October 31st, 2020. Human Resources Employment Report. Employee Handbook Modifications. Student Transit Contract. And Demo and Trends Charge and Study. I would hear a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. We'll do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes.
Thank you. We have one individually considered resolution tonight. It is the advancement of the policy that was discussed at our previous meeting, 343.1, the equitable multi-level system of supports. So we'll have a chance tonight to discuss as a board. I want to first give the floor over to both Jim Schmidt or Becky Graff, I'm sure, and Mandy Van Vliet. There were some questions that the board had asked over the week of the administration. One was for Jim's team to briefly explain the talented and gifted plan that the district has. I think there's some misunderstanding about what this policy does for talented and gifted programming in our district. So we've asked for him to explain that a little bit. And then there was also some requests from Mandy to help describe some of the implications for our special education. So we'll start with Jim or Becky if you want to start, and then we'll go to Mandy, and then we'll open it up for board discussion before a vote.
Sure, I'll start. And actually, I think one way to start, I think, might just be to address some of the questions in the public comments. So, am I able to share my screen?
Marissa will make you the presenter.
Okay, thank you. Something come up that says I can do a share made up. The share button hasn't come up yet. Oh, there we go. Got it. Well, the first speaker warmed my heart, wanting to see data. And so actually this is a sampling, and we can provide the board many other examples of this. These data are from, oh, sorry, I've got the wrong year. This is actually 1819, not 1920. The reason why we do not have 1920 is because we did not test last year for the state assessment due to the pandemic. So what these data tell you is this is a group of students that have gone through the pre-algebra acceleration. So in 5th grade, these students were identified for an acceleration. And actually this acceleration is actually quite a rapid one. It helps students get through algebra by the end of 7th grade and geometry by the end of 8th grade. And so what we're seeing in this particular slide is as 5th graders, the students identified for this program, 62 of them in 5th grade on the state assessment, which is the forward exam, scored advanced and 34 scored proficient. Within the 1 year of being in the program, more than half of the advanced students had already fell to the proficient level. And then you can see in 7th grade, those that were advanced in 6th grade of those 29, 20 stayed advanced, and of those that were 33 proficient, 8 came back. And then it's 8th grade, you can see how it continues to separate out. So one of the things that we noticed in our own data, and also bears out in the research when, and we keep referring to John Hattie's research. And for those of you that aren't familiar with John Hattie, will know that Hattie individually doesn't do the studies, he studies and looks for meta-analysis. You know, people often say, well, you can find any research to support whatever it is that you're trying to find. What Hattie does is look at the combination of different research studies and shows the patterns that we see in them. And one of the patterns we see is that we have to make a distinction, and we're trying to do this by actually rebranding people, the gifted and talented program to be talented and gifted. So talented students are typically your high achieving students. And we tend to see them end up in a lot of enrichment and accelerated courses. And what we're seeing in the data, both from the research or the compilation of the research and from our own internal data, is that these students are not growing. It appears like they would, like it feels really good to put students into enriched programming and put them into an accelerated course. Truly gifted kids, and there's a very, we're talking about a very high benchmark to hit in terms of demonstrating giftedness, do benefit from that. And we'll talk about a little bit about the plan that we are continuing to update. But many students that go along, the talented students that go along with those accelerations, the research in our own data show that they do not benefit. And this is just simply one example. So that is one piece of data we want to share with. The second speaker really talked about you can't do like algebra and pre-calc in the same class, and we agree. We're 100% with you. We're talking about is that pre-calculus students, that you differentiate for all pre-calculus students instead of saying, we have the higher group and the lower group and really separating them out. The message gets sent to kids real quickly. As I said, that do students that students know. I think the word I heard just earlier was students become acutely aware of different abilities. We like to refer to it as different performance levels, and those abilities can change over time if given the appropriate differentiation supports. We do not try to put kids into the learners and not learners, of the successful, non-successful, or the high and low. We have found it, and the data will show you that in heterogeneous groupings, you can have very, very successful students that develop at a pace to meet their needs. So the other part is that AP doesn't change this. Transcript and credit courses, advanced placement, Project Lead the Way, early college credit program with Eau Claire, Start College Now, all of those end of career programs in the Eau Claire School District do not change. We consider all of our courses preparing students for that. So rather than trying to slim the pool down in 5th grade going into 6th, we really actually like to try to develop that talent by providing students opportunities and differentiation as they progress through their program. The third speaker talked about starting this in elementary school. Really, actually, what you're looking at right now is where the issue is. There is no more critical juncture in our school district than 5th to 6th grade. This is not an elementary issue. This is really a 5th to 6th grade issue. The identification and pressure we put on identifying students and really tracking them at that grade level really tends to lock kids in for many years to come. We've worked, and I'll talk a little bit about the work we've done to try to provide, as we talked about, on-ramps and off-ramps, so that students are not locked in, that they have the opportunity to be able to grow at different points in their career. But this is this really, and as I wrote to the board over the weekend, what ends up happening, this just doesn't affect math. Once you put the student in this affects a lot of other, it affects their music selection, affects their English courses, because you tend to group these students together. You create tracks, not just in that program, but in many others. So some of the things that we've done to address this, and we have worked with, I heard the thing, like, we need to reach out to more people in a broader audience. We surveyed students. This was right before the pandemic. We ran surveys in the students that were in the accelerated or enriched courses and the ones that were in the non-enriched or non-accelerated courses. And we asked them questions ranging from the level of challenge that they feel to do they see others like them in those courses, et cetera. During just before the pandemic and then after, we worked with our staff to work on different layers. First, the identification process, to really be systemic in the way that we identify students as either talented or gifted, which are two different areas. And we worked with teams in math, English language arts, and science, and it was an elementary, middle, and high school mix of people, because they all are part of the issue in terms of trying to create solutions. We then worked on different groups in each of those areas on programming. We've had follow-up meetings since then, and after the start of the year, when they said our teachers are overwhelmed, yep, they're busy, which is why we're waiting till after the start of the year to begin to work on the professional development, because the design was done with teacher teams and with the input from the data that we've pulling from the student feedback. And additionally, we sent multiple communications to families and really offered an opportunity for input. We didn't really get much. We got a few phone calls. I took a few of myself. A lot of them for clarifying, to really try to understand where these letters specifically about their child or about programming. We've created multiple communications to try to be clear on the changes that we're making. So this has actually been ongoing since the spring. This did not just pop up 2 weeks ago. What has happened is we have the confluence of that work with the policy work. So the policy work really aligns the work that's being done with both the Emlss and the internal work that we've been doing, along with the policy when it got raised about instructional groupings. That was a policy that's been around for quite a bit, and it really is the confluence of those two things that brings us here today. So the idea that this is just popping out at the last minute, really, we've been working on it for quite a while, working on it in public meetings of policy and governance, working with teacher teams. Not everyone's going to be really excited about this, because we're going to have to continue to evolve the way we instruct and try to meet the needs of students. Differentiation is our primary way of supporting talented students. Providing the cluster grouping for gifted students to try to provide that need for them is really the critical piece, is that tier 2 or 3 intervention. And as I mentioned, when you try to run enriched and accelerated programming, you end up putting both things together when really the benefit only is experienced by gifted students. And when you do that, you end up running into what I refer to as that staffing problem. It's very difficult to try to create a full class of gifted students in these courses. And so what you end up doing is you end up supplementing that with talented students, and it really doesn't do them the instructional need that they need. What we really need to do is provide that differentiation within the classroom and then do that cluster grouping. I was just meeting with one middle school teacher, principal today. We're talking about doing this for next year, and we were talking about how we need to hand schedule this group because it does require that type of care, just like you would with a special education student. So these are the things that are going in place. It's been very systemic. This is not something that we've rolled out, without giving it a lot of thought. In terms of the talented and gifted programming, we are making a shift as well in ensuring that we are meeting the needs that are identified in the standards. There's a few emails and postings I've seen around about not meeting state statutes, and really that's not true. We really are actually taking those very seriously and trying to make sure we meet the needs of all students and the students in the gifted program in particular. Becky Graff has helped us construct that the language in that plan. It's still in its draft form. Really didn't expect it to have to be showcased this soon, but we did share with the board the version where it's at. And I'm not sure if Maida, if you've been able to queue up Becky just to kind of add to a little bit that I did, just to provide a little more context about the planning that's been done in that area.
Hi, I'm Becky Graff. Thank you for letting me join tonight. I'm hoping that you can hear me. And we've been working in the background on updating our talented and gifted programming documents. And I'm excited about the work that's going on. And I agree with Jim, the amount of input that we've had thus far and will continue to gather as we're continuing the work is really exciting. I think one of the biggest things that I am excited about is that we are switching to organizing this around the national standards that we have for our gifted students. And the program is described by what we want students to achieve. We are working really hard to increase access for all students. We are working to make sure that we have pathways that students can enter and exit in multiple ways and at multiple times so that we don't limit students. In the current program, you start in 6th grade and it's very difficult to on-ramp or off-ramp. And so we're really working to, thank you, Jim. We're really working to make sure that we have multiple ways for students to enter and exit so that we're increasing access. In the actual program that we're outlining, you could pass to page 8, Jim, that would be good. That's it's got the EMLSS framework. Thank you. And you'll see here it's described with the tiers. We have the majority of needs can be met in tier 1, which is in the classroom level. And we continue to support students in the classroom level in tier 2. And then our most intensive supports for extensions happen in tier 3. And all of these still exist and they will continue to grow under the new program. If you scroll a little bit further, let me compare on my program. You'll see classroom supports and system supports that have to be in place to make sure that we're meeting all 3 of the tiers. And Jim, if you want to feel free to jump in, you can do that as well.
The other part is, and I agree with Becky, but our plan does lay out a comprehensive look in terms of meeting the standards through the different tiers of support and really recognizing what is done in the classroom and then tier 1 and tier 2. And then that tier 2 and tier 3 where it gets much more intensive. And really, one of the speakers was right. This is going to be a big lift for our teachers. I will say also this year, we really weren't able to do it because of the COVID scheduling. So we really are in a reset pattern of really like saying, okay, now we've had a year to step away from that programming and really talk about how do we support different tiers of instruction and intervention within and outside of the classroom. This is heavy work. We're really looking at this through meeting, being, of course, the document talks about state statute, but also meeting the needs of all students through a systemic way, really that does allow students, and again, we use that term on-ramps and off-ramps, and really allowing students not to be pigeonholed into those that are going to be the high achievers at a young age, but allowing students the opportunity to be able to grow and really flourish when the opportunity, when things start to click for them. I also think Mandy is going to speak a little bit. I think there were some questions raised about special education and the continuum. So I do want to give her a moment to be able to answer some of those questions.
Good evening, everybody. I'm excited to share how special education fits into this model. But I think before I do that, I think it would be helpful if I provide a little bit more context
around some of the wording that is in the policy as well as the rule, and then I will circle back to the framework and then share with you where special education fits into this. So Maida, are you still?
That was actually me. Where do you want me to?
Okay, could you put the rule or the policy up?
Yep, I just have to unshare and make sure, so give me just a moment.
All right. So when Jim gets the rule up there, a couple of things that I would want to just bring your attention to, and this is just to build more context around the meaning and the purpose of an equitable multi-level system of support. Actually, if you could go to the policy, sorry.
No worries.
All right, if you could bring your attention to the second line there where the first line ends in to establish an equitable multi-level system of support to provide equitable services, practice, and resources to every learner. So I want to take a moment just to talk a little bit about equitable services, practices, and resources to every learner based upon responsiveness to instruction and intervention. I want to highlight that because that's one of the things that in order for us to establish an Emlss system that supports all students, we need to break down our work as a district and look at our services, our practices, and our resources to ensure that they are equitable for every student. I'm going to bring your attention down to a little bit farther down into the policy where it speaks to ensure access and opportunity and success for all students. I'm highlighting these key words because these are very important in any information or research around providing an equitable multi-level system of supports. And a really key word there is all students. And that's definitely where our students with disabilities fits in, is all students. So as a district, when we say all students, that includes students with disabilities, that includes our gifted students, our talented students, our English learner students, all of our students. So the equitable multi-level system of supports provides a framework for us as a district to ensure that there are equitable services, practices, and resources to meet the needs of every student. Could you go to the rule, please? And the policy does reflect the responsibility that we have as a district to provide that continuum of supports. The rule does go into a greater explanation of the different tiers and how we would go about meeting the needs of every student. So if we think about really meeting the needs of all of our students, that continuum is very great. And this is how we provide those different services, resources, and practices in order to meet the needs of all students. We are required to provide intervention to students that are not meeting benchmark and not being successful, and we need to have equitable practices in order to support that learning. So that's in reference to the tiers and the different levels of support that will be provided to students when they are not able to meet benchmark. You'll also see we were intentional as we designed the framework. Jim, could you go to the framework now too? Sorry, thank you for assisting me here. Thank you. So when looking at the framework here, you'll definitely see the different tiers. And I would want you to look at this through the lens of meeting the needs of all students. So when students are not being successful in the universal level, we need to layer on additional tier 2 supports and additional tier 3 supports so that they have what they need so they can be successful. And we did utilize the Wisconsin Equitable Multi-Level System of Support document to help us formulate this framework, and they had great information and guidance that we used as we developed this. DPI recognizes students in special education as a tier 3 support, as well as our students that are English learners or students that have been identified as gifted as well. So that's where, when we think about how do we provide supports and services to all of our students, those would be, that's where our students in special education fall, is those tier 3 supports. One of the things that we were very intentional about as we designed this framework is just looking at the framework, you can see that tier 2 and tier 3 are within tier 1, the universal level. And we were intentional about that. As students progress to the different levels, whether we are providing additional challenges to our extended learners or our talented or gifted students, or to additional supports and services to our students that are identified as special education. We want to do that across all levels in order to meet their needs. Jim was referencing the differentiation that needs to be done in the universal level. We too want to provide that same differentiation for our students with disabilities so that they can be successful in the universal level as well. At times, some of our students in special education, in reference to their services, we need to think about our services and how we provide special education services to our students. Sometimes those students need to be pulled out into a special education classroom so that they can receive their services. And other times we can provide them right in the universal setting or the general education setting. So in thinking about where that fits in on the framework, that's that supportive learning environment, is providing every student with what they need, whether they are a gifted child, a student requiring special education, an English learner, or a student requiring just something a little bit different. Could you go over way to the right to tier 3 there? You can also see tier 3, the middle gray box there, individualized. That's really where, in connection to our students with disabilities, that individualized instruction, support, and assessment, that's where the IEP is, and that's where we have that legal document that we outline the needs and supports that a student in special education would be receiving, as well as a student with a 504 plan, a student that has qualified for services for English learners, or a student that has qualified for gifted services as well. So as you can see, we were very intentional that this framework would be there to meet the needs of all of our students. And I think that's really important, especially on the bottom. If you could zoom out, Jim, thank you. We are very intentional with the bottom section of the framework for equity for all students, and for providing equal access to all of our students will create opportunities for all students. And then in the end, we hope that all of our students will have success. So this is certainly not going to happen overnight. And I'm excited that if we were to shift in this direction, that we would be working hard as a district to implement equitable practices, provide equitable resources and equitable services so that we can meet the needs of our students. So I hope that information gave you a little bit more context on how all of our learners across our district fit into this model.
I'd like to kind of piggyback one last thing off Mandy's. In Mandy's role, the designation of the district being proportionate in identifying students of color in special education has been something that we've been grappling with as a district for more than a decade. Our district's response to that as part of our plan is what you're seeing in front of you. So it is really to make sure that we do things through systems. I was actually, again, it would warm my heart to hear the request about strategic use of data. We are really fortunate to have a strong team working on this. Our Director of Assessment, Michelle Ranke, really helps us work around 4 major domains. The first domain being program. What are we offering in terms of programming? The second domain is demographics. Who is in that programming? And I'll tell you right now that if we start looking at enriched and accelerated courses, those students in those courses are more white, they have higher income, they have less disabilities, they are more likely to have English as their native language. We also know that we want to look at how are students performing. So that's some of the data I showed you earlier as well. And finally, we look at perception data from our families, our students, and our staff. We are trying throughout this to make data-driven decisions. And I remember very clearly when our facilitators with the Wisconsin RTI Center said, you don't have to make this stuff up, just look at your data. It tells the story, and it really does tell the story. We know that when I heard about like having underrepresented students be more represented in gifted programming, we wholeheartedly agree. And we really need to create systems to ensure that it is less random and more statistically probable for a student that has giftedness to be identified, and also to have talent, if they have talents, to have that talent nourished. This is there, and I think There are other folks that have been deeply involved in this work that you haven't heard from tonight. But this really does come from all angles. But the one part that we're encouraged about is the conversation actually that follows, because the coherent governance discussion and the benchmarks that we would see in terms of successful equitable multi-level system of sports should mesh together. They should be very synchronous with one another. And we're excited that the board and that pathway of coherent governance can hold all of us accountable and be much more strategic in our data at a systemic level, so that we really can improve that equitable access, opportunity, success for all students.
Jim, Becky, Mandy, thank you for all that information, all that background in response to our questions. That is very helpful. At this time, I'll open the floor to my colleagues for comments and questions. Commissioner Lyons.
Thank you. I support the ideas and the ideals and the educational philosophy behind this system. But that said, I was a little surprised at the amount of people that said that they were not aware of these changes and have asked for a little bit more time to digest them. I think one of the callers talked about a postponement. And I was wondering, I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know the timetable or if there's any timeline that delaying it might cause issues down the road. So I was wondering if you could comment on that, and if there's an opportunity to actually postpone this.
Sure, Dr. Bika, I'll go to you, and then we can hear from the exec team if they'd like to. No, go ahead, Dr. Bika. Okay, so I guess, well, Jim, if you'd like to, or any of the executives, I guess we'll have you first.
Yep, we, really it comes into where the rubber hits the road comes into staffing and classes next year. So we can delay. We can try to get more input. I'll tell you that historically we've seen people that have a strong belief that this is good for their child, but when the data doesn't always bear that out. So you will, anytime you see something else, you will see a bit of a conflict between the data and perception. And that will always be a challenge. And I mean, but if the board wishes for us to dig into other groups, we've done it before and we'll do them again. And we're pretty good at getting input from a variety of stakeholders. And if the board feels that's necessary, we can.
Go ahead, Dr. Bika.
Yeah, I was thinking from the perspective of somebody who teaches future teachers at university. I can't imagine that there's a teacher preparation program in existence in the United States that prepares educators to teach in a tracking system. These data, and I'm so appreciative of the local data, but the national or international data have been there for decades. And so we know, and teachers are prepared to teach in mixed ability classes, not in ability grouping. It is detrimental to children at the elementary, middle, and high school level. It's a bit of it is unavoidable at the high school because there are elements of one's education that have to dovetail somewhat with vocational plans for the future. But to avoid ability grouping, even at the high school level, is always the aim in teacher education. And so I don't know why we would wait any longer than we already have. But I do say what's needed is the support for teachers. So what kind of structures do we need to put in place where people can return to their roots, how they were trained, and to be able to realize that training. They are prepared for this work, but they need the support.
We agree. And I'm just pulling up on the plan document that we sent earlier to you. Now we're just to see how well I am at finding it. Becky, at any point, if you tell me the page, oh, here we go. So we do actually have a timeline for the professional development. ELO is essential learning outcomes. These teams are meeting monthly right now. They've done fabulous work in terms of really in a time of turmoil, really focusing in on the things that are most critical to prepare students for the next level. And we're going to be working with those teams in January so that they can begin to develop. So what I have in front of you is a skeletal plan as we work with staff as we move into the spring and then the summer to really help prepare teachers. And I agree with Dr. Vika. One of the things that I did share with the board also that there's this tendency to, in some cases, to narrow the scope of the students that we support, and really it's the richness of a broader audience of students that can really help all boats rise. And so we feel pretty confident that our staff helped us get here, and our staff will help us get to where we need to be next year. Everything we've done in the professional development lens has really been through their input. I mean, we have a wonderful group of people that listen very closely to the needs of our staff, and they pivot quite well to try to be responsive to those needs, and we'll continue to do that. The groups that we brought together, as I referred to back, all the way back to December and January a year ago, to really help build this work, that really help identify those benchmarks and that model moving forward. They did outstanding work, and when you work with these teams of teachers, I have the fullest confidence that they're going to help us really design the supports that they need to be successful. I also again like to remind us that this is a year, because of the uniqueness, that we really are really without any of this this year. So we really do have a chance to re-envision things, not from the old ways, but we really do have a chance that it has provided a unique opportunity for us to do a bit of a reset and really think forward on the way things, basically to think of things in a growth mindset. So we're pretty excited about that. We know that folks are taxed and challenged this year, but they also, as we met with them this fall, they're acutely aware and really want to be part of the solution.
Commissioner Harder.
Thanks for doing this work. I too support the objectives of these changes, and but I share some of the concerns about how we're going about implementing it. I want to, obviously, as all of us do, make sure that we're rolling it out in a way that is the most benefit to all students and is supportable for our already strained staff. And I know we all want that. So could we speak a little bit more to just the idea that there were some concerns that have come up about the speed of the change, and it's helpful to see this schedule here, but in terms of the viability of making this happen and in what timeline, how much is going to change and when, and do we believe it's really supportable?
I would like to go back to the third person that participated in the public comment about us starting in elementary. This is what elementary always does. We have a few students that do some acceleration. It's really a conscious decision as a district we made several years ago to start creating these tracks that really has narrowed the focus within a classroom. But as I talk with principals, the word disruptive comes up. This really does disrupt their ability to develop their students. It puts kids immediately into tracks. They really don't have the ability to create flexible groupings of students because they've already, as a matter of fact, I just had this conversation today, and it really does. And then teachers will even say, and even teach both the enriched and the regular, they'll say like, yep, we know what this is doing. We're really creating two different expectations for students. I think the question really isn't, are we going too fast? I think the question often should be, why haven't we done this sooner? And I would argue that it's pretty hard to defend the past practice. I really think we really need to question possibly the alternative, which is not are we too fast, but have we not gone fast enough?
Thank you.
So I have been feeling the same way. I think both Commissioner Lyons and Commissioner Harder and Commissioner Beaker for that matter, I have felt like in one breath, this is one side of me that just, I look back on a meeting, Tim and I met, Chair Dean and I met at a Starbucks like 2 years ago. And we signed each other's nomination papers for the board. And we subsequently had a 1 hour long, it was like an argument, only we were agreeing with each other about how terrible secondary tracking is and about how we need to get rid of it in this district. And it needs to happen. It needed to happen, 10 years ago. And so this has been something that I have passionately read books on and talked to teachers on and talked to teacher trainers on. And I have watched TED Talks and I have read studies. And this is far and away the right thing to do. There is no other way to ensure equitable access and true integration of our schools, true integration and true anti-racist behavior within our schools than to accelerate all children and give all children access to opportunities that they should have, and to challenge them all to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that this absolutely starts in middle school, and I fully 100% support, and I cannot thank the district enough for that, for the first of all, for the data. The visual was helpful, but the transition from 5th grade to 6th grade, we have a propensity in this district right now to treat middle school as if it's a mini high school. And that is not what middle school is for. We need to leverage the social and emotional development, the potential of children at that age group to understand their peers in a different way. It's not a competition between a high achieving student and a student who struggles. It's not a race to get someplace. We are a community of people, and we need to be that way together, and we need to teach our children to be that way together from the very beginning of their adult lives, for all intents and purposes. Now, there are some real challenges here. And on the other side of the coin, so I am passionately in support of everything that our district is doing in relation to this. The challenges, however, are real. And every case study that you read about detracking, it is the same as we heard in the comments at the beginning tonight. Not enough support for students who struggle. How are we going to get supports, right? How are we going to make sure that high achieving students are challenged? And the fact of the matter is, those aren't things that the school board should be deciding. We can't determine what's the best way in which those things happen. Now, I think we come down to implementation. So here's what I'm coming to. I could sit in and get caught up on the hows we're going to do this forever and a day. But at the end of the day, all I can say as a board member is I expect it to happen. And I expect it to happen with the highest amount of fidelity and the highest amount of quality as humanly possible. And then we have to go and we have to do it. So the two challenges that I come to that I'm having a hard time with. The first one comes in the professional development. It comes in differentiated instruction. It comes in the jigsawing techniques that are necessary. It comes in the process rubrics that have to happen in addition to assessments. It comes to the learning behaviors-based observational tools that teachers have to be able to have in order to make sure that low-achieving students aren't just being assessed on testing data, that they're being assessed for growth and they're being assessed for the behaviors of learning. But and again, that's not something I get to decide. I'm grateful for the presentation tonight. I feel like it gives me a lot more information, but that is something I would like to see more of. I would like to see more information on how we're going to do it and the pace at which we're going to do it. The last challenge that I come to, that this is the one that I get hung up on. This is the one where I am having a hard time. Because in every case study that I have read on this subject, the change is so large, and it's not simply a technical challenge of curriculum and assessment and professional development, but this is a normative challenge, right? This takes an incredible commitment, not only on the part of our district and our staff. It takes resources, it takes time, and it takes a whole boatload of patience. And our community needs to understand that. Our staff needs to understand that we're not going to nail this right out of the gate. This is going to take time, and we're going to have to get it right. So that comes down to rollout, right? That comes down to how we go out to our community and we talk about this. We haven't, at least we haven't really done that. I mean, it just came out of policy and governance, and it even shocked me, and I'm on the school board. So, and not to say that the EMLSS stuff hasn't been happening. Certainly we've been hearing about that. You know, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be stable, it has to have buy-in on all of the different levels. We have to know what the reporting measures are going to be, what we're expecting to see, what resources we need to allocate, and that is where I'm getting hung up. That is the part of it that I feel like we could have done a better job on. We could have spent more time solving some of those issues, because that big vision stuff, that's what the board does. Going out and talking to the community about it, that's what we do. That's where we fit. And we really haven't had an opportunity to do that. And so maybe someone could speak to me about a time frame for how we're going to work over the next few years to make sure that we have consistent feedback with our community, with our staff, with the board. What are we going to be looking at? What data can we expect to see? So that's my hang up. And I know it was a really, really long comment, but that's where I'm at.
Actually, I really appreciate it, because you helped me remember some things I wish I would have said earlier. So thank you. You know, one of the things that we've recognized through this process is we talk a lot about intervening with students, but we also recognize that the whole model really is predicated on a public health model. And that really is that your universal programming will be successful for 80% of your students. Then if you are doing well enough in that area, you will then be able to intervene and provide those extra supports for the remaining 20%. We haven't been at that level. We've been hanging around 50%, and we really have recognized that we have to be much stronger at our unit. So we already get ourselves into the intervention before we've even become highly successful at the universal. Now, we're not alone there. It's not like Eau Claire is very different from the rest of the world. We've seen pockets of success in the district. Meadowview a couple of years ago in math was right about 78 or 79%. It was really exciting to see. So we've seen moments of real high achievement. We haven't been able to stick there. So one of the things on that, and I'm glad again you recognize the need at middle school. And when we met with our curricular teams, they agree. And one of the things that we've done in the last year, and this was, so one of the things, and I think we all have to give ourselves a little bit of grace here because there was this uniqueness of the pandemic. We worked very closely with the Anagen group to work on the communication and all that, but really it tends to get drowned out in this environment. There's just a few other things that are grabbing the attention of folks beyond innovation and curricular programming. But even if you look at the follow-up to the newspaper, Lear Telegram, rarely will you see the things in there that have to do with curriculum. You'll often see the things that have to do with budget, right? So curriculum doesn't grab the attention. It's very tough to get that around unless it immediately affects them. So that's just something to keep in mind. But in addition, the teacher teams we worked with did know that there was a universal programming at Tier 1 need, especially in middle school. And so this year we've begun to roll out college preparatory mathematics, which is what's used at the high school. It is an outstanding facilitated based mathematics program. It has a high success rate. Of course, no prior program ever walks into a school and does wonders without highly skilled teachers implementing it. So with that, we also do have a coaching plan for the CPM staff to support our staff. We also have adopted, and so now we actually have consistency at the secondary level in terms of mathematics programming. We have math expressions at the elementary. We had big ideas at the middle. We had college preparatory mathematics at the high school. We now just have the two, and we've had deep discussions about how to transition so that we can get our students successfully there. And that was a challenging discussion, and we feel really good about it. We know that this is a really tough year for implementation, so we know that's going to take us a little bit to be really successful at it over time. But we, at least on the mathematics end, really feel very confident about our universal programming and in terms of something to build upon. Because you can't start doing all the other professional development things that you were referencing without really having a solid foundation, which we feel we have in terms of programming. Likewise, for English language arts, we have adopted Study Sync for the middle and high school as well. I would argue, having been in this area enough, it's been a bit of a patchwork of programming. For the first time, we're going to have a lot more consistency in that programming as students move through by having a very similar universal program. And it allows for that differentiation. Again, it's very difficult to start putting the drapes on the walls until you have a solid foundation and framing of a home, right? And so we now actually, in English language arts and mathematics, for the first time since I've been working in the curricular area, have a solid foundation from which to work, and then to develop those supports for teachers. But you can't do that if you don't have consistency in programming so that you can collaborate both within a grade level and between grade levels. And so, so we feel really good about that. The other piece is, and you touched on, and I was really excited to hear you say this. This isn't just about curriculum. So part of the work we're doing is around the curriculum, the assessments, the high quality instruction, the job embedded work. If you think about the plan for this year to have professional development every week for 2 hours. We actually have an infrastructure in place this year that is quite unique, and to try to do that within their teaching day, within their work day is unheard of in my career. And if I can just bounce you back a couple of meetings when we did the Mind PD, we talked about things that were expectations, right? And one of our expectations is that they have 4 experiences, our staff, in equity, professional development this year. That is, again, tied to this. These things are all linked together. We don't want, the equity piece ties into the Emlss just like the Study Sync for English language arts, just like the college preparatory mathematics. These things all funnel toward this. And so to touch on your last point, which I was very excited to hear you talk about the data, I do believe, and our team does believe, this has really been focused around teaching and learning, but this is much bigger than teaching and learning. This is really a system-wide, and we really have got to collectively, as you start looking at coherent governance and the benchmarks that you want to hold the district accountable for, this is the thing that's on the screen in front of you is it. We did some sampling already of what the data could look like in that with the policy and governance team. We can share that as well, and the data can be as broad as what I shared tonight. It can be as narrow as looking kid by kid, and we have these. Basically, you can think about it as a heat map, where you look at different assessments for each individual child, and looking at patterns and looking for strengths and challenges for each child, and where they are succeeding and where they need to grow. But as you think about coherent governance, we encourage you, all the folks working on the Emlss, this is bigger than teaching and learning. This is really organizationally, and if we can collectively, the things you were talking about, that discussion I would love to have heard between you and Chair Nordine, this is the type of thing that we can really focus on and really create those benchmarks and hold ourselves accountable to see how we're doing in those domains of program, demographics, performance, and perception data.
Thank you, Jim. Commissioner Clements, Dr. Johnson, either of you? Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, I think as we continue to have this discussion, I would like, not only our community members, but I think our remaining board members just to consider when we think about why this is a concern. We have to think about when we're talking about all students. I know some of the comments and the emails that I received wanted just to focus on race. The foundation and historical concepts of this resolve around RTI and primarily about the inclusion of students with disabilities. And so when we think about all students, we're talking about English language learners, students with disabilities, children who are experiencing, I think, trauma via socioeconomic status, which our district, it's high in, primarily white. And then it's those students of color where the idea of just the unconscious bias, and it's inherent in our district, and it's been inherent in our district that there are unconscious biases, unintended, but they have consequences. And so, this particular policy has a huge impact. And I think for some of the commenters to insist that data does not exist, the data is prevalent. I ask you if you want to just do a quick Google search on differentiated instruction and where it leads, just Carol Ann Thompson, just a Google search her name and a lot of information will come up. You will see in that proposed draft that was presented today, you look at a lot of John Hattie's work, and you will see that the data's there. And I really like it's one of those analogies in some of Hattie's work when we talk about why should we move this way. But the analogy goes like, it's just like flying first class versus flying coach. Now, I'll have to personally admit, I've never flown first class. I do that with a family of 4. But while both can get you to the same destination, nobody would claim that they give you the same experience. At its core, the educational experience is supposed to be safe. That's the one last ingredient that says that you have a chance, that your educational experience will be the same. And personally, and for a lot of people of color, a lot of people who are marginalized, we believe in that myth. And it's been a myth. But we hold on to the myth that if we are provided a similar educational experience, that skies are the limits. And so for me, I support this, but I guess my concern, just like a lot of interventions that are specifically for students with disabilities and other marginalized groups, this ultimately potentially will fail if we don't ensure that necessary supports are there for both our staff as well as our students. And even though we're not charged with kind of how those resources are delegated, as a board, we definitely can continue to ask the questions and raise the concerns, especially when our staff, if they feel like the supports are not there, and or from parents who feel the supports are not there for their students to be successful. And so I'm in support of this motion, but I would really just ask that our community, as well as some of our teachers and staff that are hesitant to potentially move in this direction, just consider those pieces. Thank you.
Commissioner Clements.
Well, I don't know if I can adequately follow up on some of the very passionate and informed comments by my fellow commissioners. My question at this point is how can we ensure that we have the resources in place and the commitment to see through implementation, because as was presented, it takes a commitment, and it takes time, and takes monitoring and fidelity to the model. What are our concerns at this point to ensure that we have that follow through? But because I expect that it will take time as we implement, and early results, as we're rolling this out may not be where we want it to get. So how do we know that we're pursuing this model as intended?
Yep. A couple of things that I would add right now that would support that question would be, I'm going to bring your attention to the outside framework there, where you see organizational structure, strong shared leadership, positive culture, and family and community partnerships. A lot of this, we have been working on this work in our district for a while, and some of the things that have been behind the scenes. So those 4 items on the outside have been placed there because those are foundational components that create sustainable systems. And that is one of the things that we really focused on a couple of years ago when we were identified as having disproportionate numbers of students of a certain race in special education. And this was our response to that identification, was to ensure that we have supports and a system in place to provide students with what they need instead of qualifying them for special education. And in our research and work of that, these are the 4 foundational components that we found when a district does not spend time with focusing around organizational structures and strong shared leadership practices, the sustainability is not going to be there to support the system or the pieces at the universal or tier 2 or tier 3 level. Another thing that I'll bring your attention to is the gray boxes in the universal level, which then also extend into tier 2 and tier 3. A lot of this work that, and the questions that you have on how are we going to do this, it is very intentional work around collaborative practices. Jim spoke about the different curriculums that we have shifted to in our district to have that guaranteed Bible curriculum. High quality instruction, those are the practices and providing the teachers with the professional development that they need so that every child has high quality instruction in their classroom. And then of course, balanced assessment and family engagement. I bring your attention to those because those are not things that we work on in isolation. This, in order to provide the supports to students, these all need to come together and be braided together so that it is possible to have that differentiation for our students and that supportive learning environment. So these things that we've been working on, this is not brand new for our district. We have been working on how do we create, for example, strong collaborative practices that will support our teachers in understanding what differentiation looks like in the classroom and how to support every learner, whether on the high end or students that need additional support. And as we work with our buildings to put these supports into place, those are what we refer to as systems. So buildings have systems that support students at all of those different levels along the continuum. And one of the things that when districts aren't able to provide those supports across the building is they don't have systems in place to support that. And that was something we also recognized that we were missing in our district a couple of years ago when we were identified as being disproportionate, is that some of our schools were lacking the systems that need to be in place to support our students. So one of the things that we have done is you maybe have heard of a position, Heather Grant fills the position now as the Emlss program administrator. And what she does is helps our schools with their school improvement plan to ensure that they are building systems that represents the concepts and ideas in this framework as well. So schools will identify areas that they need to grow in and then work to provide practices, equitable practices, and have the resources in order to put the needs in place that need to be there for our students. So that is, it speaks to Commissioner Clements, what you were, a little bit to what you were referencing is how do we know that this is work is going to be done, and what type of practices do we put into place to ensure that it is going to occur. The last thing that I would point out is we also can look at this framework through a district lens. So how do we strategically use data? Commissioner Zur, you were referencing the outcome data and the different data points that we could use to check ourselves. Are the practices and the supports and the systems that we're putting into place, is is the data showing us that it's working or not working? What do we need to shift and what do we need to change? And then how do we need to support our buildings through those changes? Jim, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would. A couple of things. One is the positions that Heather fills and our coordinator Alyssa Knight fills in that area. They are funded through dollars through special education that we were required to federal dollars are required to use to support the implementation of our model. Our choice of implementation was really to work on those structures. And one of the things we talked about, so that's great. It's a separate pot of money. It's outside of the traditional things that we work with the revenue cap. But we really do have to look at, that's why I said this is bigger than just, a teaching and learning piece. The way we staff, the way we allocate resources, and strategically look at the way dollars are spent to try to leverage them in the way that has the biggest benefit to as many students as possible. This is why this is broader than just teaching and learning. This really does interact with looking at a variety of resources we have and how we use those resources effectively, both human resources and other resources. One final thing, and Mandy's right, she's spot on with the far left things being the foundation. And that second one, the strong shared leadership, means that we don't shove things down people's throats. We really do work with our staff to really identify this. Every once in a while, we get to some really tough spots where we need protocols and processes to help advance the work. We might do something like forced consensus or other sort of tools like that. And in this particular case, the message from the board and your decision on this is going to be huge. Periodically, it does help for our staff to see leadership at different levels from themselves, but also from the board. I heard that earlier, top down. It does go both directions. I can tell you names of people that have tried building this, and they are numerous. But it does, and they've been a strong part of that foundation as well. So it does it is all hands on deck, and we each have a role. And you're signaling that this is a direction we want to go, and will be very important to our staff. It will matter a lot in our work with them.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mandy. 35 years ago, Jeannie Oakes released her book, Keeping Track. It was one of the first major publications that illustrated in a research way how putting students into different groups is a racist policy, is an inequitable policy, is a classist policy. And at that time, it may have been okay to say, well, if we change out of this, maybe we will harm other students because we didn't have a research backing. We have 35 years of consistent research showing that the processes of putting students into different classes, not giving them the same high-level curriculum, and keeping them apart is not a benefit to those students in the high-level classes. As Jim mentioned, we don't see those students growing any different. As John Hattie found, studying over 300 different studies, the effect size for tracking is 0. But what it does do is it serves as a tool to harm students that end up in the lower levels. And I, for one, when I find out that something is actively harming our students, especially those students who have been given less voice and who have been given less opportunity historically, will always stand up to say, we need to end this now. As Dr. Vika said, why would we wait one more minute than we have to? As Jim said, we actually should have a hard time defending why we haven't done this sooner. We've heard from our executive team the massive amount of preparation up and down the district, not just from Jim, not just from Mandy, but from teachers, from surveying students. We've heard about the plans to get it going. We've heard about the data that they're going to collect and that they're going to look. And we've got in our rule, in our policy, that we will be watching to ensure that this is implemented at the highest level of fidelity. If we are hurting our students, that is untenable. If we are hurting our poor students, our students of color, our special education students, we cannot continue that. That's why I'm really happy to go last, because I'm going to take this opportunity to move to adopt policy 343.1. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
And I'd like to do a roll call vote on this, please.
Commissioner Nordin,
Absolutely yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. We'll now adjourn the committee. Our one item for committee report tonight is the discussion and possible first reading of the changes to policy 443.1, student dress. So this policy came to us for revision by a staff member in one of our high schools who had a dress code issue with a student. And as they examined the issue, found that the student's rationale for this was a head covering that the student was wearing was in fact valid, and that our policy was discriminating essentially against the student, and asked us to reconsider the policy itself and the rules by which we had gone. And so we worked on this with Superintendent Johnson's help, with Kim Coley's help, to craft a policy that better conforms with where we are today and is a more equitable policy for all of our students, frankly. The rule also has some changes in it, and that will be communicated with our staff, making clear what the new expectations are. At this time, I'll open it up to any questions or comments, and then we'll do a read. Commissioner Lyons.
Could you give a little bit more background? What brought this forward?
Sure. Superintendent Johnson or Kim, would you like to speak to the process bringing this to policy and governance?
Sure. I can speak to a couple of examples. In the previous policy and rule, we had, or in the current policy and rule, we have some guidelines that either target gender or are typically applied to a specific gender and probably don't so much apply to other genders, or to certain students of various cultures or backgrounds. So as an example, one of the things right now that is not allowed in school is headwear. Anything on your head or over your hair is prohibited. So as an example, a baseball cap might be something right now that staff would ask you to remove. Take off your baseball cap. But a do-rag is also something that staff would ask you to remove. Sometimes girls will wear a bandana in their hair to hold their hair back from their face. That might be okay, but if somebody else were to wear a bandana, they might be asked to take it off. So there's some inequity, and we had a couple of incidents both last spring and this fall where it was very clear when a student was sent to the administrative office that it was an inequitable situation. But by the policy and rule that we have in place, they really did need to ask the student to either change their dress or remove the headwear or whatever the case might be. And so based on those experiences for those students, administrators asked if we would consider looking at the policy and having it be updated so that it was more equitable to the students we serve.
Not seeing any additional comments or questions, could I get a volunteer to read the revised policy for us?
Just as on screen?
Yes, please.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
The district recognizes that each student's mode of dress is an expression of personal style and individual preference. Therefore, responsibility for making student dress decisions will generally rest with the students themselves and their parents or guardians, except when their choices cause a health or safety concern or interfere with the educational program or school operations. Accordingly, students are prohibited from wearing attire that causes or is likely to cause a substantial disruption of or material interference with school activities, interferes with the district's educational mission or related policies, or endangers the health or safety of the student or others. This policy applies during the school day, in school vehicles, and at school-sponsored activities. The building principal will inform staff, students, and parents and guardians of this policy annually and provide for the fair and consistent enforcement of the policy. Principals will document and report dress code violations each year, including the demographics of students involved and the nature of the violation. Aligning with 343.1 rule, the disaggregated data will be used to ensure this policy's anti-racist and anti-bias practice. If there's a disagreement between staff and students and or their parents or guardians regarding the appropriateness of a student's attire, the principal has the authority to make this decision and determine the actions that will be taken to deal with the matter.
Thank you, Commissioner Harder. Any additional questions? Dr. Bika.
So I'm sure I'm not telling you all anything you don't already know, that these dress code policies have historically been, sexist, racist, classist. I really like the way this policy is going. I am curious about conversations you had around this point, interfere with educational program or school operations, just the idea of creating interference. And that's where the discrimination often lies. So I know the connection back to the policy 343, but how did you talk about that, those of you who crafted this? And did you consider going further in kind of an operational definition of what it means to interfere?
So Kim, I'll ask you to weigh in on this since the bulk of the development happens with the administration.
Sure. So some of the conversation around that probably came on probably the other side of things. So as an example, one of the things that we talked about is the Confederate flag is a symbol of hate. And by simply having that in our schools, it does cause an environment that makes it very difficult and disruptive for students to learn. And so by using that language in the policy, we can then address things like having a Confederate flag, on a shirt or something like that. So there's the benchmark is causes a substantial disruption that really comes from the freedom of speech for students, is whether or not something substantially disrupts the academic environment. That's where administration can tell students that they need to take a shirt off or change their shirt or whatever the case might be, or is perceived to cause that disruption. So that's where the language comes from. And the context of our discussion was when we know that there are things that will cause a disruption, we will be able to address that with students. However, I guess I'll just add also, like the collection of data, I think, to kind of perhaps what you were wondering about on the other side, is that collection of data annually will also tell a story. And if we find out through our data collection that we notice, for example, that 90% of the time that we say this is going to cause a disruption, it's because of the way a female student is dressed, then that becomes a talking point for our staff. How are we implementing this? And what is it about, you know, our perception of that dress? And why are we calling that student or those students out on that? So I think the data collection will help us dig into some of perhaps what you're wondering about on the other side of things that we didn't discuss.
I would say that's been the talking point in a lot of our policy development, is making sure that we're monitoring these policies to ensure that, you know, so if we have that language that I think, you know, maybe a little looser in there to allow for some interpretation, to make sure that it is not, we don't have, say, racist or biased practice. So we do have that point, and this one we've specifically talked about, you know, whether or not school administrators were disaggregating the data and saying the student came down for a dress code violation, and Kim shared that, you know, previously it might just be the student was defiant, and the fact that they came down for a dress code violation and what that was would not have been captured. And so we were intentional in putting in that language to say, we want to know about the dress, we want to know that it started with a dress code, who the student was, so that, as Kim said, if we find that it's 90% girls, or, you know, overrepresenting our students of color, so that we can ask questions as to why is that happening, and is this allowing us to have a biased practice that we will not tolerate and that we need to revise, of course. Commissioner Lyons.
This isn't really a new issue at all. I'm just wondering if the language that we have in this policy is based on any boilerplates borrowed from other institutions, or is this something that we drafted ourselves?
I did use sample WASB policy. That was initially what was brought to policy and governance, and then it was revised from there.
So, for example, we added the paragraph about reporting and data monitoring, because that's been a focus of ours. Commissioner Zer.
So first of all, I just want to thank the administration for bringing this policy change forward. I actually had a email from a former classmate of my daughter who, before having had this draft of the new policy, had sent me some suggestions related to the original dress code policy, and many of this group of students' concerns that she was a part of are met in this. I would say that I agree with Dr. Bika that I have some concern about interpretation of, like, I guess, like, yeah, how certain things could be defined. And I'm wondering, I didn't really hear a great answer as to why we have not defined what. So, for example, what does it mean if something violates a safety? What does it mean if something is not safe? What does that mean? Or what does it mean if something interferes? Or there was another word that I lost it now. But those are things that I worry about interpretation. But can I just ask a clarifying question, that our plan is to monitor that through data and then go back to individual staff members who might need some additional supports in how they're interpreting those definitions? Is that the plan?
We do have, so there's a rule that follows this that defines some of, it just expands on this a little bit. So as an example, for safety, it really puts it in the context of some of our courses. For example, tech ed or physical education. There are certainly some dress requirements around safety in those courses. Or in family and consumer sciences, if there's a hairnet that's needed, it discusses that. It also talks about, as far as disruption, things like alcoholic beverages, tobacco, sexual references, profanity, and that sort of thing. So that's all defined in rule. If this is passed, one of the things on my to-do list will be to work with principals to define a rollout to staff and professional development for staff around what does this mean and what has changed with this. So as an example, previously if you were wearing a jacket and a baseball cap, you likely would have been asked to take both of them off. What is that going to look like now? So there is some discussion about among staff. Certainly, we need to help them understand what this change is, because I think it was Dr. Bika perhaps who said this is really steeped in history. And so, there will be some institutional memory that we'll probably have to address, and that will come through discussions with staff.
Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I would just like to add during committee conversations, the other thing that I really appreciated that was discussed about this particular policy and in the rule was that as issues of uncertainty come about in terms of principals making decisions, that would be, those decisions would be shared amongst the principals at the different levels, to then potentially get some consistency across buildings and with issues. And that was affirmed to us that those conversations would take place as issues. And I felt a lot more comfortable knowing that. So if one principal, one building had a particular issue and it was some uncertainty there, they talked it over with everyone else, then moving forward, all principals would have an idea of kind of how to deal with similar situations in their particular building to potentially avoid, I think some inequities as it pertains to different decisions making out different buildings. And so, if that's continuously part of that process, I think we would not have as many issues arise moving forward once the initial rollout takes place.
So it seems that the question here at this point is, what's the will of the board? Would you like this to go back to policy and governance and work on some more concrete definitions? I think or are we comfortable sending it forward for approval at the next meeting, or at least potential approval? Getting a nod for Dr. Bika, but Commissioner Harder?
I would be comfortable moving forward with it now and leaving the details to the staff and get updates on how it goes.
Are there objections to moving it forward? All right, then we'll go ahead and we'll put it on the next agenda and go from there. Thank you, everyone. At this point, we will adjourn to our planned work session. First, if you could make me the presenter at some point, I'll share my screen as we get onto this. So as of course all of you and everybody that's watching this knows, we are working through developing a set of coherent governance policies to help focus the way that our board does work and keep us focused on the outcomes of the district. One of those sections is on our governance culture. And tonight for our work session, we wanted to take the opportunity to share the draft that's been put together of language on governance culture. This is one of the ones that has somewhat less variation as we look from district to district and we compare with the resources that we have for from our good governance as a choice. But there are a couple of things tonight that I wanted to focus on, and of course we'll go back and we'll bring more draft language and we'll have a chance to discuss this more. So even though we're only going to focus on two of the draft policies tonight, this is not going to be our only chance as a board. We'll have significant work through this. So tonight we're going to talk about some of our governance culture, and screen 2 there. Oh, Jim, now I see why you had to almost unshare. The first one is the governing commitment. It's quite long. And I've got a couple of things here you can see in italics, just some of the times where I've put this rationale. This was, since it was so boilerplate for most districts at this point, I've got it. Oh, I need to zoom it in, huh? Is that what I'm getting there? Thank you. Yeah. Let me see if I can do that. Make it go. There we go, a little better. Since it was so boilerplate, this is graphs that I've taken by putting them together from the different samples that we've brought in. So I do have some little bit of rationales. And two things that I wanted to focus on for tonight were further down, if we get into board meetings is in number 4, to ensure that the board's business meetings are conducted with maximum effectiveness and efficiency, members will. And various different districts describe the way that they want their meetings to run in different ways. So I've listed all of them here from the various ones that, we're up to T. No district has all of that, has A through T. So the first thing I want to talk about is this overall governing commitment. And if you've had a chance, hopefully, to read through some of that, one of the things was just to get some insight on what do we want our standards to be for board meetings. I'd like to just open it up, and there can be, we can discuss anything in this particular policy draft as well. We can move up and down. I'll take some notes. And yeah, so there's a lot of them here. And we can go, this is an opportunity to kind of set our meeting culture the way that we would like to do that in Eau Claire. So I don't know, I'll just take comments or questions or discussion at this point. I think we can probably do it without me recognizing each speaker. So if you have something to say, just go ahead and jump in.
I guess for me, it's a matter, I guess, as we consider the items listed in number 4, I think really taking under consideration, it appears that some of them are dispositional and or decorum pieces, and I'm not sure that I guess as a professional, I would not be that concerned about that, but I guess we have we have evidence that all school boards don't necessarily function with the necessary decorum and disposition. So I can see whether, but I guess I would be not in favoring of including some of those. So when you, I guess when you talk about C, D, E, I'm not really sure what. Is F talking about just one person taking over? Yeah, and I understand that's probably those probably would change based on the makeup of a particular board. So I guess as we consider whether or not do we want to include those items, I think all of us just a self-evaluation from a decorum and disposition of where we stand. So
sure. What are others' thoughts on those items? Dr. Mika?
Yeah, I agree. I would include K in that mix. I don't know if these are boards that have never had a single parent trying to wrangle adolescents at home during a board meeting. Sometimes it's necessary.
Well, for what it's worth, I think these are sort of common sense notions of, as Commissioner Johnson said, decorum essentially, and they make a lot of sense. I think they're good guidelines for us to aim for, and I think that every board member, I would trust every board member to use his or her good judgment as to if they need to be bent or broken for some reason.
So, Commissioner Hunter, your feeling would be that it would not be necessary to list these as well? I mean, I think that's what Dr. Johnson and Dr. Bika are saying, that we should be able to get by.
Yeah, I will say it doesn't alarm me to have them listed, but I also think you know, I assume these are guidelines of how sort of a protocol of how we behave. We've had these before. The key works, I think, talks about this. We certainly have language like this already in our existing policies that are along these lines of decorum. It doesn't really alarm me to see them outlined here. I guess the question would be, what is the consequence if somebody doesn't follow these? Well, I assume the consequence is, you know, the rest of the board might kind of look down on them, and that could hurt them with the board. And it's kind of self-regulating in a way, I guess I feel. So I don't feel real strongly about leaving it in or taking it out, honestly.
Following up on those points, you know, thinking about what is the purpose of illustrating these, and what happens if we do or don't, you know. I think if you say, well, would you rather have them or would you rather not have them? Again, I think many of these are practical matters of decorum, but I think fortunately our boards, in my observation of present and past composition, functions reasonably well. But what happens when it doesn't? When you have a board that might not act with these principles? But then I think the good question is, what happens if someone isn't, you know, regularly meeting many of these, short of finger wagging? What's the consequence?
I just noticed actually item P would be another one in that array. Perhaps they could be consolidated into a single item, just about, you know, a single decorum statement that would encompass all of those.
Yeah, I was thinking something along the lines of like you know, members will practice, you know, professional and respectful behavior towards one another. I mean, that seems like it seems so obvious until I guess until it's not. But I feel the same way. I feel very ambivalent about whether I want these in there. However, I'm so new, and all I know is the, you know, 6 of you. I don't see any of these as being a problem, other than maybe the president serving as my spokesman every once in a while. That's a joke. But no, I don't have any problem with it, but I guess if we are going to list them, I would like to consolidate those, what is it, see through, yeah, whatever the ones that Commissioner Bika just mentioned, and including Pete. I think that it's just professional behavior is probably going to summarize that pretty well.
So the ones, just for reference, since we've been talking about it for a little while, the ones that have been brought up so far under this particular umbrella that I have written down are C, B, E, F, K, and a P. To answer your question, Commissioner Clements, about what would happen, further down in one of the other governance cultures is a method to address violations of the board. It might be right after the board member code of conduct, but it's in this section. And the standard practice across basically every district that I've looked at is the first step is the board president or another member talks to a board member who is in violation of one of these, you know, conduct policies privately. Then it gets referred to a discussion in closed session with the full board. And then there's kind of there's a 3 or 4, you know, that basically ends up as, you know, public censure of the board member. So there is a mechanism for when we have if we were to have a situation where, for example, you know, a particular member would not wait to be recognized and interrupt a board member. Delineating them probably makes it in some ways easier to say this is the one that you're in violation of. I don't have a strong feeling on condensing it down to some sort of practice, you know, professional decorum. But I think that's why they're set out there. And I think certainly there's an operational thing, as Dr. Johnson was saying. Right, like some of these get added, I think, over time as boards find out, oh, we have this particular problem going on and we need to revise so that this doesn't happen in the future. And speaking of the future, we do have to probably try to envision the rails for future boards. We will not be here in perpetuity. And so while, future boards can make adjustments as they see fit, it might behoove us also to think about, what are the guidelines we'd like to set as a standard for future boards. So all that to say, I don't necessarily have a strong feeling one way or the other. We're going to take this feedback. We'll talk about it in policy and governance as we move on to that. That's serving as sort of the draft committee for this before we bring it back to the full board for more discussion.
If there's, so did you just mention there's a separate piece as it relates to code of conduct?
Yes.
So then, that consolidation could be the reference to the code of conduct that will potentially include, I don't know, does the code of conduct include some of these behaviors that we're saying potentially that are listed? I guess for me, it's that whole idea that, because it could be a reference to those code of conduct pieces, but then also the you said the listed consequences. A way of potentially consolidating. Because I guess I just find humor when we're saying that we're about efficiency with this, but then we have a list of up to T. So it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of, but that's just.
To be fair to our sample districts, none of them go to T. I just lumped in all of them. Like many of them, I think all of our Wisconsin districts, the 3 that we are looking at from all of the policies are DeForest, Chippewa Falls, and Racine. I think all of them do actually include those laid out, won't interrupt and those things. But again, one of the things I've appreciated about going through this process of clear governance is that it allows you to be efficient in how you lay things out. You set the standards, and I'm all for trying to streamline this. The governance culture will be the board's responsibility to self-monitor, and so annually we'll go through these policies and we'll have a discussion or an evaluation of whether or not we are living up to them and whether or not they need adjustment. So having it streamlined to begin with may make it easier for us to do that, and then of course as issues arise we could do that as well. I moved down to the code of conduct for members, and you can see this list goes to S, I think, as I scroll down a little bit further. My comment here, the highlighted section in the top there, A through F, is common to every one of the districts that we had there. So you were asking about what, how does this overlap? That number 4, the governing commitment, talks about the behavior at board meetings. These are more generalized, and of course we have a code of conduct already in our board policy as it stands. So you can see some of the other things, but that A through F is that's all 3 of the Wisconsin districts plus Aspen, Colorado, as our Fairfax, Virginia has a board member code of conduct for Virginia, and Fairfax uses that particular one. So it's not good here. So I guess since we're looking at this, maybe we should jump back up, but I just wanted to show you this at a glance. We'll come back to this in just a few minutes, but I'll scroll back up and we can talk about the up through T and see if there's anything else that we'd like to consider.
Well, I guess
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of taking a different position from my initial one. I mean, as we're thinking about equity with all policies, and to think about equity for these board policies, I mean, again, if the data show, for example, if you want to talk about monopolizing the discussion, you want to put something into, and we know that there's a gender difference in these settings. So if you look at the data, men are going to talk more than women are in a setting like this, in many settings. And so I guess if you look at these policies from an equity perspective, that might change. So you create a dynamic that's equitable for boards. You talked about that.
I will admit to being a veteran interrupter, and I know that's a particular, so if that one gets struck, I will be the first one that it gets put in for. But and you're right in terms of there's often a gender dynamic that's apparent when they study how people speak in meetings. So that might be something to consider as well. So Any other, again, we're going to take all of this feedback, we're going to go back and talk about it in policy and governance as the, sort of draft working group for that. Any other, comments or thoughts? We've got, even if we condense down C, D, E, F, K, P, that is 6 out of something like 20. I don't remember what is 20, it's T, the 20th letter, doesn't really matter. We'd still end up with about 17 of these if we didn't get rid of some of these others. Are there any others that you're looking at and you say, perhaps we could streamline this out?
I'm feeling like there's oh, I'm sorry. I hear I went and interrupted. Someone was talking.
That was my fault. I didn't quit talking when I had signaled that I would quit talking.
I think we should actually leave all of those back in now. So
No, so it looks like it comes down. There's preparation, right? There's preparatory expectations. There's communication expectations. There's behavioral expectations. I think if there's some way to consolidate kind of based on those overarching overarching kind of, because you can see there's even the word communicate is in 6 of these. So it's definitely very much, I don't know what's the word for it, you can put them together, a lot of them. That would be my suggestion. The only additional thing I would also second is somehow inclusion of bias language. I thought I had a minute where we could put it in, but it's gone now. So.
Well, certainly, Commissioner Zur or anyone else, you're welcome to send feedback to the members. Like I said, Policy and Governance Committee are the ones that are doing this particular section as the work group. So you can certainly send us ideas or thoughts outside of this time too. So if it comes back to you and you want to say, "Oh, this is what I was thinking of in that term," please just send it on, and we'll consider it and add it to draft language and bring it back to you.
And the last thing I'll say that I forgot to say is that there's a part of me that really wants to pull a lot of this out, assuming best intentions and assuming professionalism. There's also the very likely possibility. I used to think that it wasn't possible for somebody to be in an elected office that would do these types of things. And so but we know that that's not always the case. And so I do think that having some sort of clarifying language in there that if there is a disruptive, and there I'm using that word that we don't define very well yet, some sort of disruption that causes the board to function with difficulty, I would want there to be a mechanism by which other board members could, some place for them to go back to. So I don't want us to throw the baby out with the bathwater long term.
So to summarize, as we talk about the meeting norms, what I'm sort of hearing is the idea that, obviously, and this was obvious when we brought it, that we wanted to consolidate some of these. Commissioners, I think your categories, I think are good ones to build around, right? Preparation, communication, behavior. Is there a fourth one that I've now forgotten? I should have written it down.
Something related to anti-bias, or if there's an overarching kind of expectation we could put in that category.
Sure.
I don't know if we can. None of these are really kind of in there, but maybe they are. I'm not sure.
I think there's, some valuing equal participation of all members is a very soft one. I think it probably could be strengthened, but I think that's what that particular one is trying to, elucidate. So I think what we can do on that section is we can go back and we can look at it with a mind of, within these categories, how can we slim it down so that it's efficient and effective for us to monitor, but also preserves, as the baby while getting rid of the bathwater. So if everyone's okay, maybe we'll shift down to the code of conduct. I know we've we've run a little long tonight anyway, so and it's a similar thing here. We have this long potential list up through S there, because of the, for heaven's sake. I'm just going to hold it on R and S here because I'll scroll up to the rest of them. So R and S, and again, I've just mashed everything that all of our districts. I didn't want this to be something that I just said, these are the ones that I think, and I just give you that as the draft. I wanted you to see everything that our sample districts are talking about. So for R and S, before I move back up, assume a non-defensive posture, taking the initiative to communicate and ask questions for clarification, and then publicly support final actions of the board. And then I'll bring it back up here so we can see the remainder of the list. And again, the same, I'd just like to have a discussion kind of along the same lines. What do you see as you read these over? What are your thoughts? How can we condense this? Again, all of the districts have A through F. Some of them stop there. And then there's others, as you can see, there's differences among the other districts. And I did not bring in anything from Fairfax, Virginia. It's specific to Virginia, but it also includes a lot of these types of items. It was just structured on that, so I left that off of this one. Again, so just open to thoughts or comments.
Well, I guess I'll just say these are, once again, seem all reasonable and also kind of in line with what I recall from just our existing code of conduct. Not, this is a lot more granularly detailed in terms of, as you say, going into not only items J, K, and L, but up to P, Q, and R and S. But the general tone of it, I think, it's the right idea. It's good advice. It's common sense. And very similar to the last one. It's like, well, I'm not sure if we really need it, but I don't mind having it.
I guess for me, I take. I'm not sure I would go along with D. No public servant is above criticism, and so I think I think we can have debates and differences, and when the decision's made, and we leave it like that. I guess in my existing on a university campus, if you can imagine, there's not a lot of PhDs that agree on a lot of things, and so it just lends itself to understand that you're not above criticism. So then the other piece is, if you're married, you're criticized all the time, or you have a permanent partnership, you're always criticizing that. So for me, I don't really. D doesn't really mean, and I'm still bothered, and this is just my hang up with the coherent governance whole piece. The whole thing about trust. I'm not really. I just expect individuals to actually do the job that they were voted in to do. It's not a trust issue. You guys seem like pretty okay people, but I don't necessarily. I don't trust any of you because I don't know you really that well. So it's kind of. I really have a whole. I have some issues with the whole utilization of trust. So when I look at this, the three in that statement I could do to ensure an environment conducive to effective governance, to build trust among members, I just expect the voted members to actually do the job that they're supposed to do. And then, so that's for me, with my issues with trust, the end would actually not be necessary for me to assume and practice trust. So I guess that's really kind of, hopefully what I just said it's not a personal attack on anyone. It's just a professional belief, I think, in public service work.
Sure. I mean, you hit on two things there. And I'd like to hear other people's ideas about D. Again, that's common across the thing, but that doesn't mean we have to keep it by any means. But you also, said when the decision is made, it's made. And I think that gets into B. And that is really, I think all of us, as we serve on the board, are going to find times where we vote no. or we vote in the minority of our colleagues. And afterwards, we might say, I didn't agree with that decision, but the decision is made and I respect it. And I think that's what you're getting at there. I wonder if the criticized part is, I wonder how they're defining criticism, right? Because it's one thing to say I don't agree with, or I have real concerns about, and I wonder, that's my wonder as you say that, because that's one of the ones that I thought of too, just in terms of what does that actually mean? Like if you never get a chance to see a board member say, well, I really have some concerns about this. I'm worried about what this is doing. I can't support this. If that's taken to mean that that's criticism, well, then I think that does become an issue. So other people's thoughts on D?
I assume it's critique of people, not of policy or ideas in D, but just the ambiguity of it alone is enough to make me feel very comfortable saying let's leave it aside personally.
There's a personal thing here where there's like you can see these overarching themes that exist within a lot of these, and there's the personal, keep it professional, right? Keep it, again, it's not an issue of if you're acting in a professional manner, your criticism in public, it might not be, it would be something along the lines of what you just said. And when you go up to, where was that one down on, sorry, I just keep losing the thing I'm going to say. Yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch in there where it comes down to just like communication, professional communication between board members, or respect between board members. It's M, respect, demonstrate respect for each other's opinions. I think it's the same. If you're demonstrating respect, you're not going to be criticizing them in a personal way. You know what I mean? So I think you can just lump it all together. Like, well, not, you could even say something about like personal attacks or something. I mean, maybe that's even too gross, but they can all get kind of lumped together under, almost like subheadings or something. Again, there's also this like communicate in a timely manner to avoid surprises. That's just, there's communication ones again that can just get put together.
I would say with that one that is something that I had to learn when I joined the board. The idea of send my questions ahead of time to the administration so they can know, or let my colleagues know, hey, I'm going to ask for this item to be pulled from the consent agenda because I want to talk about it. I don't want to, that was a learned behavior for me. That wasn't how I assumed the board. It was like I would just come with all of my rhetorical bullets in my gun to the board meeting, fire them off, and you're right, of course, commissioners, there that it just falls into that professional communication. But I at least know for me that was a learning point in joining the board of how we can work together to allow the administration, for example, to prepare more effectively and answer our questions better, right? If I catch them flat-footed, it's not good for anybody, right? I don't get the information that I would like. The administration doesn't get a chance to show that the work that they've done. But I think some of these, as we go through, are behaviors that maybe seem well, yeah, obviously that's how we do things, because in many ways we currently have a board culture that is reasonably functional in terms of how we operate with one another. Now it may not always work, but I think that's what we want to think about too. Is what are the things we actually learned when we joined, and that we want to make sure that other members have an idea of right from the get-go as they come on.
I'm still learning how to effectively do that. I'm still not very good at that. So I do think that like I said, I do think that there's a communication piece, and I think that that's really important. I think that the personality aspect, that, you know, it's number A, focus on issues rather than personalities. I think that encompasses that, you know, criticize privately, praise publicly. I mean, I think if you're doing all of that, you know, if you're treating each other in a professional manner, you're respecting the voices of your colleagues, you're intrinsically going to be trusting them, however that's defined. I think Dr. Johnson's right that, like, it's not always it's trust, it's an expectation of, you know, of performance in your role and how we monitor that. So, you know, I really think it just comes down to finding whatever these overarching groups are and then making some better statements that encompass more of this.
Could I suggest in E, or just a further conversation in E, could we strike, just make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity of the board, strike out promote the positive image of the board, because that positive image of the board, it's fluid and predicated, I think, as the board makes decisions, whether or not it's positive and or negative in terms of the image. So I make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity of the board and one another through open, that promote that positive image. I guess for me, when it says, if we didn't have like the district and the community, and really it's that and community piece at the end, that really the boards may not always have a positive image, you know, with the community. And that's a fluid situation in my opinion.
Yeah, I've made a note here. I think that bears some more discussion, so I think we can bring that back up. How about maybe as a way to wrap up this section, what items on here would you what items are there, or are there items that you would are absolute, like, don't delete these? You know, like, if this one should not be deleted because it's very important in your mind. And for me, it's really A through C. You know, I would, if someone had brought that up, I would have had a harder time understanding, you know, where that comes from. It's not that they can't be adjusted, but I think just, you know, if we were to remove one of those, that would.
I guess B for me is probably, you know, the one that I would want to make sure that I think the integrity of the board going forward is, you know, once a decision is made and our district is moving in a certain direction, we all need to be working towards that in whatever way. And yeah, we can say, you know, if we didn't agree with something, or we thought, you know, personally that it wasn't strong enough or it needed work, you know, we can continue to work on it, but we have to acknowledge that it exists and not be, you know, creating divisiveness out in the community around something, because it's, you know, that'll get toxic really fast. So I think A and C, I feel like, could be almost umbrellaed with other parts of these things. I mean, some of them are just very redundant. Some of them don't need to be there. But B feels very, very much very important to me personally.
So in general, not hearing that there's a lot of them that are, you know, sacred cows, that gives us some flexibility then as we pursue it in our draft committee to try to find those the common ground to the umbrellas, as you were saying, commissioners, there that we can fit under. So we'll take some of that feedback. Again, I encourage you. I know, when we had our work session with our guests from Chippewa Falls, they said, if you want to help put yourself to sleep at night, go ahead and start digging into the coherent governance policies. Please feel welcome. I know all the board members, I believe, have access to the governance culture policies and the board superintendent relations policies, since those have sort of complete drafts at this point. Again, we're closing in on having it as a group through board superintendent. We'll start working on the governance, the small working group, I mean. Operational expectations, we've been, chipping away at as we go. And when those are in kind of a draft form, we'll send access to everybody else too, and we'll talk about those as well. And I encourage you, I guess, by way of saying all that, I encourage you to, if you look through them or if you get interested in something, please just send me or in the governance culture case, the policy and governance members, that's Commissioner Clements and Dr. Johnson and myself, feedback or ideas. Like, we're always, we'd love to mold this around what our needs are as a district, so we'd love to consider that. So feel free to do that. Thank you all for that input tonight. That helps us get a sense going forward as we work through these. And of course, we'll be back many times with these sorts of discussions as we go forward. At this time, then, I would like to ask for, or if there are requests for future agenda items. And Marissa, you can hand it back to Maida at this point. Hearing none, we do have our agenda setting meeting tomorrow morning, so I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. Our next meeting will be December 7th. At that time, we will still be in a 100% virtual learning environment. And as we have matched our board meetings with the learning model that we've used in the district, we will be 100% virtual next meeting, and we'll continue to be so until we're back. When the district goes back to its blended model, we'll be back here in our blended model. But for the 7th, we'll be entirely virtual. So thank you all. I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.